good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all of you. I'm pleased to welcome you to our side event, which is titled The Land Footprint Embodied in Trade, a new tool to assist distant drivers of deforestation. This is quite a technical and specific side event. We hope you will find it interesting. So the work we are going to present is still in progress in a way. So our objective for today are first to ensure a large scope of researchers and technical experts know about it, and hopefully receive comments and suggestions for further steps. The agenda of the side events is structured around two parts. First, our colleague Iñaki Arto, who is a research professor at the Basque Centre for Climate Change, will present the tool and the methodology that was used for developing it. Then Maria José Sanz will be our moderator of the panel discussion. She's the scientific director of BC3, the Basque Centre for Climate Change, and she will dialogue with our expert invitees who will bring the feedback and insights on the tool and its possible uses. Before we start, I would like to remind some housekeeping rules. As Serena said, we are mostly in a virtual event. For attendees joining us virtually, it would be very important that you mute yourself during the presentations and also turn off your video when others are speaking. To make comments or share information, please use the chat function. For asking questions, please use the Q&A function of Zoom. Some of the questions will be answered live by our panelists at the end of the event. The work we are going to present aims to contribute to a better understanding of land uses related to agriculture and their links to deforestation. Conversion of forest to cropland and grassland has been for decades the main drivers of deforestation. Nonetheless, observing the direct conversion of land use is not sufficient to design strategy for more sustainable and balanced use of rural and natural lands. So the development of global supply chain of agriculture and forest products. This novel database, based on multi-regional input-output techniques and on FAO datasets, include the new supply utilization accounts, production and trade statistics for agricultural products. It tracks resources flows along the global supply chains and provides detailed information on the production, transformation, bilateral trade, and final use of more than 500 agricultural products and 20 wood products in around 180 countries. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Iñaki Arto to present the tool. The floor is yours, Iñaki.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Okay. Can I share my screen? Yes.
We can see the presentation now, Iñaki.
I prefer to show my presentation. Can I share? Because I changed some slides. Yeah. Can you see it? Yes, no?
Yes, you need to put it in presentation mode, please. Great.
Okay. As Caroline has already introduced, I'm going to present the database that we have been developing during the last years. A database that is aimed to calculate the land footprint and land embodied in international trade in order to better reflect the land implications of global supply chains of forests and agricultural products. So this is the outline of my presentation. I will start with a brief introduction of why we are developing this database. Then I will introduce the database, the FAO multi-regional input-output database, and I will show some results and uses and finalize with some conclusions. The background of this work is basically that in the last decades, the world has witnessed an increase in globalization of the supply chains of agricultural and forest products. This is something that we can see if we go to FAO statistics. For instance, we can see that in the last 30 years, harvested area has increased by a factor of 1.3 from 9.9 million hectares to 12 million hectares. This is all the the cropland harvested in the world, the increase in the last 30 years, but trade has increased by a factor of 3.6. The volume of products of agricultural and forest products embodied in trade has passed from 6.8 billion tons to 24.5 billion tons. This is a huge increase, for instance, if we compare with the area harvested or even with the production that has increased by a factor of 1.7, from 60 billion to 102 billion tons. So if we compare the ratio of global trade on crops and animal products and the production of these products, this has increased from 11% to 24% in the last 30 years. So we can conclude that international trade has become a key element to understand the expansion of the commodity frontiers and the land implications of land use and forest and ecosystem conservation. In order to better understand these processes, in the academia, in the last years, they have been developing different concepts and metrics to analyze this phenomena. And there is an increasing use of these indicators by policymakers and decision makers. In particular, two different indicators have been developed. The footprint indicators, these indicators show the area harvested worldwide to satisfy the domestic demand of agricultural and forest produce of a specific country, and the embodied or virtual land in trade that represent the area harvested in one country that it's required to satisfy the demand of another country. And in order to compute these type of indicators, different databases have been developing during the last years. There are three main types of database. First, we have the monetary multi-regional input databases, like the Exio-based database, that these databases capture in monetary units the flows of goods and services between the different sectors and countries and the use of final products. These databases have also environmental extensions, computing the land use required to produce the primary products that are required to produce the final products. And the pros of these databases is that they can fully track the supply chains, including the intermediate and highly processed products, and make the link between the final consumption in one country and the environmental pressures in other countries. And in the environmental pressures, they usually include satellite accounts on land, water, greenhouse gas emissions, energy, etc. The cons of these databases is that they have a limited number of agricultural forest products, usually around 40 or even less, and also a limited number. They cover a limited number of countries. In the case of Exio-based, they cover 50 countries. And they have a poor representation of less developed countries. Basically, for instance, in those databases, Africa is not represented. The only African country represented in those databases is usually South Africa. On the other hand, we have the physical non-multi-regional input-output databases that are based mostly on FAO data on the production, trade, and use of agricultural products. This is an example of this database is the one that has been developed by Kastner and others that have been widely used in the literature to analyze issues related to trade and land use and even biodiversity conservation, etc., and deforestation. The pros of these databases is that they cover almost all the countries of the world. But in terms of cons, first, the number of commodities is still limited, although they cover around 130 commodities. This number is limited, and they are not able to fully track supply chains, especially for intermediate products and highly processed products. And finally, we have the physical multi-regional input-output databases, like the Fabio, developed by Martin Bruckner and colleagues. These databases also use FAO databases on production, but as in the case of the physical multi-regional input-output databases, but they use also additional information on the trade, volumes processed, feed, the seed, the food, the industrial uses and changes in the stocks. So this physical multi-regional input-output databases can be considered a step forward from the monetary and the physical non-multi-regional databases. They cover almost all the countries in the world, and they are able to fully track the supply chain of the products that are included in the database. But the problem of also these databases is that the number of commodities is still limited, around 130, and they are not able to fully track the highly processed products. To that end, they are usually combined with multi-regional input-output databases. So summarizing, there are a couple of common limitations of these databases. First of all, is the limited number of commodities that they cover. And in this sense, the capacity to describe supply chains is limited by this number of commodities. And second, most of these databases are linked to research projects. So there is no guarantee for their continuity. So in this context, the FAO together with the BC3 has developed this new multi-regional input-output database for the analysis of supply chains that we are presenting today. And what is exactly this database? Well, first of all, I would like to highlight that FAO databases provide a very detailed information on both forest and agricultural supply chains. In the case of forest, they report production and trade of wood fuel and round wood, the production of wood products by country, the exports and imports by country and partner. And in the case of agriculture, they provide information on the supply, the use, and the trade of primary and processed products for both agricultural and animal products, including the data on production, exports, imports, the part that is processed, the feed, the seed, the food, etc., etc. The question is that in order to get the full advantage of these databases, this information has to be processed, reconciled, and assembled in a comprehensive accounting framework. And this is what we have done. Basically, we have used the FAO databases, and we have combined it with input-output techniques, and we have developed the FAO multi-regional input database for supply chain analysis, which contributes to better understand the links between the land use for harvesting agricultural and forest products, the primary extraction, the transformation, and the final uses, and taking into account all the bilateral trade linkages. As I already mentioned, this is a physical multi-regional input-output table that has been jointly developed by the FAO, the Forestry Division, and the Statistics Division, and the BC3. It has like two separate blocks. On the one hand, we have the multi-regional input-output table of agricultural products that covers more than 650 products, 181 countries plus the rest of the world region, and it covers the time series 1997-2009. And in terms of satellite accounts, it includes information on land use and the Caroline content. And the multi-regional forest database is the second block of the database. It covers 20 products, 222 countries plus the rest of the world region, the period 1997-2017, and it has satellite accounts of land use and water use. These databases use the most detailed agricultural and forestry FAO datasets. In particular, they use, I would say that the core of the database, at least for the agricultural part, are the supply utilization accounts developed by FAO. That is the most comprehensive global dataset on the supply and use of agricultural and animal products. It covers the period 1961-2019 for 181 countries, more than 150 products. It covers the production, the trade, the processes, and all these different uses for the different countries and for the different products. Here, for instance, you can see an example, and a part of the supply utilization account, in this case is for Indonesia, for the year 2019, and just for the 6 cocoa products that are covered by the supply utilization accounts. Then you can see, for instance, that they report the total area harvested in that year in Indonesia for the extraction of cocoa beans, the production of the different cocoa products, the part that it is imported, the part that it is processed, food, the industrial uses, the part that it is used to feed livestock, losses, changes in stocks, the exports, and the consumption of tourists. The idea is that with departing from these supply utilization accounts, we transfer this information into a multi-regional input-output table. And for that, basically, we have to do some further processing of the information in the supply utilization accounts. In particular, one of the things that we do is to link the processed products to the different child products. For instance, we link this amount of cocoa beans that are processed in Indonesia to the products that are derived from these cocoa beans, in particular to cocoa paste and cocoa husks. And the same we do with the cocoa paste that is processed in Indonesia. We link to the cocoa byproducts that we have from cocoa paste, that are butter and powder. And the same we do with this cocoa butter and powder that it is produced, that it is processed in order to produce chocolate products. And doing so, what we can do is to link the different final uses. For instance, the part of the cocoa powder or the part of the chocolate products that are used for food in Indonesia, we can link through this supply chain, we can link this to the area harvested. We do the same for feed. We link this part of the cocoa husks that are used for feeding animals. We link this to the different type of animals. And with that, we are able to track the supply chain of animal products. For instance, we can link the demand of pork to the demand of cocoa husks and to the area harvested. And we also interlink the exports reported by the different countries in the supplier authorization accounts and with the imports of the other countries. Okay, and with this, basically what we can do is to track which are the global supply chains of the different products used to satisfy final demands. We can link, for instance, in this case, the demand of chocolate products of Indonesia to the cocoa beans harvested and to the area harvested for cocoa bean production in Indonesia. And also, for instance, we can link also the demand of the consumption of chocolate in Belgium also to the area harvested in Indonesia. In order to do that, we use additional information or the links between the parent products and the child products. For instance, these linkages between the cocoa beans and cocoa paste and cocoa husk that I mentioned before, and the shares that are these shares that are linking the outputs, the child products to the input products. We also use data from the FAO Global Livestock Environmental Assessment Model to allocate the feed to livestock and compute grazed biomass. And we also use bilateral trade statistics to link the different supply utilization accounts of the different countries. And finally, we also use forestry production and trade statistics in order to produce the MRI forest database. So basically, we do this construction of the supply utilization of the multi-regional input-output table in 3 different steps. First of all, departing from the supply utilization account of the 181 countries and 657 products, also taking information of the shares between parent and child products and the commodity trees, and the global livestock environmental assessment models, we developed 181 national input-output tables. In the second step, what we do is to link this to construct a trade matrix that is going to be used to interlink the national input-output tables. And to that end, we depart from the trade data reported in the supply utilization accounts, the export and import by commodity and by country reported in the source, and the detailed bilateral trade statistics reported by FAO. With this, we construct a reconciled bilateral trade matrix that, together with the 181 national input-output tables, we use to construct the global multi-regional input-output table of agricultural products. And then we add the area harvested reported by FAO statistics for each of the commodities. This is the flowchart for the construction of the MRIO Agri. And for the case of the MRIO Forest, the process is quite similar, and you can check it in this paper that we recently published in Ecological Economics. The progress to date, in the case of the MRIO Forest, we have a complete data set for the period 1997 to 2017 with 222 countries plus the rest of the world, and we cover 20 forest products, satellite accounts of harvested forest area and water, and we have published 2 papers. One is a methodological paper, the one that I mentioned before, published in Ecological Economics, and the other one is focused on the assessment of the water footprints and virtual water train of most products. This has been recently published in Advancing Water Resources. And in the case of MRIO Agri, this is still a work in progress. We have like two different data sets. The first one has been developed with the what we call the old SUA, the supply utilization accounts with the old methodology that covers the period 1997-2013, could be extended until 1986 and cover these countries and these products. And with recently, the FAO updated the methodology for the construction of the supply utilization accounts. And in the last year, we have been working on updating the methodology to these new supply utilization accounts. And this, as a result, we have a database that covers the period 2010-2019, the same countries and 657 products, but still here, the part of the interlinkage between feed and livestock is still missing. We are working on that. And also we are working on a draft methodological paper in order to accompany the database. Just to illustrate some of the possible eventual uses of these databases, we have prepared a couple of examples of the data that we can, or the indicators that we can calculate from the database. First, we have some results for the forest embodied interest in trade and the forest footprint. For instance, in this chart, we can see the evolution of the forest harvested, total area of forest harvested worldwide to satisfy the demand for wood products for the period 1997-2017. So in the gray line, you can see the total area harvested worldwide, starting from in 1997 with 18.4 million hectares of forest harvested to satisfy global demand of forest products. And this increased by in the last 20 years by 25% from 80.4 to 22.7 million hectares. And in the bars, what you can see is the split of the part of this area harvested in each country that it is used to satisfy the domestic demand. And the dark blue represents the part that it is harvested in a country, but it is used to satisfy foreign demand, the demand of other countries. And here what you can see is that the forest area embodied in trade has increased by 46%, the dark blue part, from 6.9 million hectares to 10.1 million hectares. It is more than 3.2 million hectares. While the domestic use, the increase in the domestic use has been more moderated, 10%, from 11.5 million hectares to 12.6 million hectares. So you can see the relevance that of the increasing role of trade for explaining the expansion of the total area harvested of forest land. And another indicator that we can calculate is the footprint. In this chart, in the light blue bars represent the area of forest harvested in each country, and the dark bars represent the forest footprint. I mean, this is the total area required worldwide to satisfy the Chinese demand, in this case, for forest products. And so you can see that there are, in some countries, there are huge imbalance in the sense that there are differences in the forest footprint, the total area required worldwide to satisfy the demand of the country, and the area that is actually harvested in each country. You can see that in this year, in 2017, 4 countries harvested almost 50% of the world harvested worldwide to satisfy global demand of forest products. Most, or the United States harvested 3.3 million hectares, China 3.1, 2.6 Russia, and 1.9 Canada. But in terms of footprint, it is the picture is to some extent different. For instance, in China, the footprint is 6 million hectares, United States 3.6 million hectares, India 1.1, and Russia 0.9. And these 4 countries also represent almost 50% of the world footprint. In terms of hectares per capita, the picture changed a lot. For instance, you can see that in China, the forest footprint is 4.2 million hectares, while in the United States is 11 million. In India is just 0.8, and in Russia 6.1. And also you can see the imbalances of the different countries. You can see countries that have a surplus in terms of forest harvested. This means that they harvest more than what they require to satisfy the domestic demand, and the difference between the harvested and the footprint are exports. These countries in Greece are net exporters of virtual forest land. And on the other hand, you have the countries that that show a deficit, a trade deficit in terms of forest land, like China, United States, India, etc. Another case study that we have prepared for this session is an analysis of the Ghana's cocoa harvested area that it is embedded in trade, and the nation's footprint of cocoa harvested area in Ghana. So here we have in these lines that represent the virtual land trade between countries, and the colors represent the footprint per capita of the different countries. Here you can see that in the case of the land embedded in the imports of cocoa from Ghana, the United States saw a total imports of 266,000 hectares, and Japan 164,000 of hectares. These are represented by these thick lines between countries. And also in terms of, you can also analyze this or interpret this data in terms of footprint. And this refers, for instance, in this case, in the case of Belgium, there is also that in order to satisfy the Belgian demand of cocoa products, it is required 3.64 hectares per each 1,000 inhabitants of Belgium, and you can have also the results from the different countries and the symmetries of the different countries. Other possible uses and types of results that we can derive from these databases. Well, first of all, this database brings opportunities for supporting policies in many different fields, like forest and biodiversity conservation, sustainable production and consumption, trade, food security, or climate change. The database can be used to calculate the footprint of nations and products. For example, we can calculate the forest area harvested in Finland to satisfy the demand of forest products in Ireland, or the soya harvested in Argentina to satisfy meat demand in Germany, or even more detailed, the cocoa cropland in Ghana to produce virgin chocolate that it is consumed in Japan. So we can describe with quite a high granularity the supply chains of crop products. This information can be also be used to analyze the driver of land use change from a global multi-regional perspective, and see to what extent changes in different factors and countries affect the land use change in each country. For example, the effect of the changes in the diet of Chinese population in the soya area cultivated in Argentina, or the effect in the population of the changes in the population in India in the expansion of oil palm plantations in Indonesia. Other possible uses of these databases are all that it is what it is related to forward-looking analysis and modeling. These databases can be used for scenario analysis in order to do future projection of global or national land use requirements according to different scenarios on population, GDP per capita, future changes in diets, changes in crop yields, etc. And also this information, this database can be used to fit a different model like integrated assessment models, CGEs, partial equilibrium models, operating models, etc. Also, the database can be used to analyze the links between consumption, trade, and production of agricultural forest products in relation to many different environmental impacts, not only land use, but other impacts like biodiversity, water use, or greenhouse gas emissions. And also the database can also be potentially used to analyze disruption of or shifts in the supply chains due to extreme events like floods, droughts, fires, wars, pandemics, or even the effects of climate change. This is quite relevant for issues related for food security. For instance, you can think now in the impacts of the Russia-Ukraine conflict in food security worldwide that can be to some extent informed by this FAO multi-regional input-output database. And also this database can be used to analyze the land use displacement across countries and induce land use change. And just I finalize with some conclusions. First of all, I would like to highlight that this multi-regional input database offers an integral vision of the evolution of the relations between land use, the production of primary agricultural and forest products, the transformation, the consumption and trade in a globalized world. It's an advance in the search, it represents an advance in the search for appropriate policy responses to some global societal challenges like the water, food and energy security, climate change mitigation and adaptation, or biodiversity conservation. And it can be used as a tool for supporting decision-making or research in different areas. As I already mentioned, for instance, decision-making in the or policy-making in forest and biodiversity conservation, sustainable production and consumption, trade, food security, climate change, etc. Of course, it can be used to analyze in quite a detailed way the global supply chain of food and or agricultural and forest products. Can be used to analyze environmental impacts of trade and consumption at country and product level. Also can be used potentially to analyze issues related to food security independence, scenario analysis, of course, and modeling, and drivers of land use change. And this is all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Iñaki. I would like, before giving the floor to the panelists and to Maria Jose, I would like to remind you can put questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom, or prepare question if you are in the room, so you can ask them when we have the discussion with the panelists and you all attendees. So thanks a lot. And Maria Jose, please, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry not to be able to be there with you, but today we'll have 4 panelists, and I hope that we will have a live discussion about these new approaches to address, to understand better how the land use changes and why. We have with us today Martin Bruckner from the Institute for Ecological Economics at Vienna University of Economics and Business. We also have Florence Fender from the Cambridge University of Technology in the Department of Space, Earth and Environment. Dominique Mana from the FAO Statistics Division, and our speaker today, Iñaki Arto from the Basque Centre for Climate Change. We will have about 20 minutes discussion, so I will encourage each of the speakers, the panelists, to invest about 5 minutes. And I will launch the panel by providing some questions to each of you. So starting with Florence and Martin, and I have a couple of general questions to you. You have been developing similar tools and similar exercises than the one that I was describing in the presentation today. Do you see any complementarity or something that you would like to highlight from these previous exercises compared to what is being presented? Is any added value that you see in this new tool that Iñaki just presented a few minutes ago? So Florence, please go ahead.
Absolutely. I would like to start to say thank you for the invitation to be on this panel, and thanks to Iñaki for this interesting presentation of this new tool. I've been really curious to learn more about it, so I'm happy to be here. So I would like to say that I come at this from the perspective of a user. So I don't produce trade models, but I've used a couple in my research. And what we do is we look at attributing deforestation to agricultural commodities, and then we use trade models to connect this embodied deforestation to consumer countries across the world. So I think that I know firsthand how useful this tool can be for really making visible the global dependencies between deforestation and the consumption and production of agricultural products. So I think it's really fantastic that FAO, together with BC3, has set out to both to improve the data that's underlying this, and also created a new MRO based on this improved knowledge. So to get to the question, is more of the complementarity. I mean, aside from the obvious value of having improved data, is something we always want, of course. One thing I would like to add on to what Iñaki already presented is that I think there's really value in having different trade models and also different types of trade models. I know Iñaki went through the broad types, so that's excellent, and the pros and cons of those. But I would also like to highlight a bit further that I think there's also a value in having different types of trade models because they describe different kinds of consumption, which might differ depending on what we're interested in. So they might be useful for different research and policy perspectives and complement each other in that way. I think we're all aware that many agricultural products have quite complex supply chains. I think we saw in Iñaki's presentation as well. And I think we might want to look at this at different levels along the supply chain. So for some purposes, we might want to use an MRO to look at the final consumption. For example, if we want to look at the national consumption footprint of a country. And for other things, we might want to go to the other extreme and get these really highly detailed flow for specific products, like we might get with something like the trace data, for example. And for other purposes, we might want to go something a bit more intermediate. So I think it's really fantastic that we have an increasing range of trade models that look at the supply chain and break it down in different ways. And I think this new physical MRO will be really exciting to get my hands on. I think it's a really nice addition, especially that it has still these trade flows between individual countries and for this whole range of commodities, and that we still keep more or less global coverage and a very comprehensive commodity coverage, which I think is important for assessing leakage, for example, and a lot of other things. So yeah, I think it's a nice addition.
Thank you very much, Florence, for sharing your views. And so, Martin, what do you think about it?
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for the talk and also for the invitation to participate in this panel. Yeah, I was really curious to get to know this new tool. And I very much agree with all what Florence said. Iñaki mentioned in his presentation that the advantage over like existing physical MRO databases like Fabio, which me and my colleagues developed, is the high level of product detail, which is yeah, quite impressive with I think over 500 commodities. That's really a level of detail that wasn't reached before, particularly because FAO, due to the collaboration with FAO, I think there was BC3 had access to very detailed data, which are not available online. But since FAO made available the detailed supply utilization accounts now recently for the years 2010 to 2019, yeah, actually this level of detail can also in the future be taken up by others, and that's also what we are working on currently. So the next version of Fabio will also include the full commodity detail. Although, of course, already so far the full commodity detail was underlying the data that were published previously in the commodity balance sheets. So I'm really curious to see what is the change in the results. What is the effect on the results to distinguish, like we have seen in this example for cacao beans, to distinguish six products derived from cacao beans, or like previously in the commodity balance sheets, where all these products were just aggregated to one item, which was called cacao beans and products, all converted into primary crop equivalents. So yeah, to see these differences, yeah, for me that's that I'm really looking forward to that.
Thank you, Martin. Indeed, this exercise was
Yeah, Jose? Sorry to interrupt, but we don't hear you well. So if you could maybe get closer to the mic or
Now you hear me better?
speak slowly.
I can speak slowly. No, I was just commenting that this exercise was triggered by the need to understand the demand side in order to understand better what was driving deforestation beyond the boundaries of the countries, and ended up into something much more complex, as you indicated, Martin. So looking to that, I'm moving now to Dominique, and Dominique, could you elaborate a bit more on the efforts that the FAO has been making in terms of improving the data available, in particular to the agricultural production and agri-food trade data, as they are the key elements for the supply utilization accounts and the food balance sheets. So, I mean, why do you think these improvements are important for countries, and can they help policy formulation, for example, at the country level? What do you think?
No, thank you very much. Let me also appreciate the great presentation made by Naki, and also what our previous speakers have been talking about in terms of the usefulness of the results of Mario. So in terms of data, as you know, FAO Statistics Division is responsible of, let's say, collecting and disseminate updated statistics on agriculture and food security, rural development, and so on and so forth. And now part of the effort we're doing as a division together with the countries in terms of availing, let's say, more data on production trade is that in the recent years, we've been introducing what we call the 50 by 2030 initiative, which is basically an initiative joined by World Bank, IFAD, FAO, and Paris 21. That aims at basically providing the statistical capacity to countries, especially developing countries that are not able to have fully fledged agricultural surveys implemented on a regular basis, for them to be able to start collecting agricultural statistics in much more regular way. That is in addition to basically our efforts of collecting data through annual production questionnaires into countries. That's one major initiative, which is aiming at covering at least 50 countries by 2030 in terms of making sure that they're able to produce statistics that we need for policy making. The second, let's say, initiative we've been doing so far, we are partnering with the European Space Agency in terms of trying to explore different ways of using the satellite imagery together with the ground truth data and see if there is a way that new approach could help us filling data gaps that we see for a number of crops, for a number of countries as well. So that's still in the pipeline as we speak right now. We haven't been able to see some of the preliminary results, but it's very promising, and we are yet to be able to start using some of the estimation from that particular approach as well. Now, speaking of trade, as you know, developing countries are facing issues with what we call uncoded trade. So when countries are reporting their trade statistics, most of the time we see really, huge gaps in terms of missing quantities or sometimes unrecorded trade. So we are working with some of the UN organizations such as the UNSD, the WTO, the ITC, to see how we can come up with a certain methodological approach that can be used to fill gaps from trade side in terms of uncoded trade, but also advise countries how best they could record that kind of information. Because when we compile them into the food balance sheet, we see some of the implications of really the uncoded trade when it comes to balancing the supply and utilization accounts as well. So those are the three main initiatives we are doing at the moment in terms of improving the quality and the coverage of data. But when it comes to the importance of food balance sheet to countries, I would mention several reasons. One, the food balance sheet is a framework that brings data from various data sources into one framework. It brings trade, production, let's say information on food, on feed and seed, and so on and so forth. Then, already having one framework that brings different data sets into one framework, it becomes a good data validation tool for a country. That's number one. Number two, when you look at the outputs of food balance sheet, which is basically the data and energy supply, that gives a country the possibility to be able to, let's say, see the food supply situation in a particular country for a particular time, but also it can be able to assess the change in the food supply over time. which is very important for policy making as well. Third, with the outputs of food balance sheet as well, a number of indicators could be computed by the country. Some of them could include also SDGs. For example, in the absence of food consumption survey, the food balance sheet can be used to compute what we call the prevalence of undernourishment, for example. That's one. So there is a component on global food loss index that could be compiled also using the food balance sheet information. That could be also useful of, there could be also input data for the harmful use of alcohol as well, because we do capture some of the alcohol products within the food balance sheet, and some of the organizations have been using it as well. Plus some other, different indicators such as the import dependence ratio, the self-sufficient ratio, the plant consumption. Those are the very useful indicators that the food balance sheet can be able to provide inputs to, and then be able to use them for policy formulation as well. Now, the way we've been promoting the food balance sheet at the country level in terms of use for data in the policy making is that we've been able to provide capacity development for countries to be able to compile food balance sheet themselves, and then they'll be able to use them for policy formulation. That's one. Second, as you know, the food balance sheet are being used in some of the global flagship reports. For example, the SOFI, the SOFA, the SOCO publications that has, let's say, specific analysis at the regional level, at the global level, and then at the country level, which provides some key insights for policies and addressing certain problems related to food security and nutrition as well. So that's one of the best way of using the outputs of food balance sheet. Now, in terms of looking at what Mario exercise or Mario outputs is providing, we see this product being also very useful because it's adding up to some of the uses of food balance sheet as well. But at the same time, it provides much more further input information for the policymakers in terms of taking the right decisions going forward. One of the example is like the import dependence ratio on Russia and Ukraine, for example, whereby by looking at Mario outputs, the country could be able to really strategize how best to cope with the shortages of, let's say, wheat from Ukraine or Russia at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. I think you mentioned something which is quite interesting and fundamental. Consistency across the scale and how the information could be used for national, regional, and global decision making. So my question now is to all of you, including Iñaki. So we can start with Iñaki, commenting on that. How these databases, like the one that is being developed together with FAO, can help on feeding into policy development and decision making, while at the same time promoting this consistency, coherency across the scale. Iñaki, yours.
Well, first of all, I think that it is clear that in an interconnected world, it is not sufficient for a country to solely protect and conserve its own forest area. In this sense, countries must consider the impacts of the consumption habits on foreign forests and communities. And increasingly, countries will need to account for their footprints and for the land embedded in their trade flows. And in this sense, tools such as the FAO MRIO or other databases like Xayovers or Fabio can be very useful for that. On the other hand, policies promoting sustainable land use at national scale, especially in developed countries, have to be coordinated with policies aiming to avoid unintended effects in other regions of the world due to land displacement across countries. There are different ways of doing this, such as considering these issues in trade agreements, or increasing the transparency in the information underlying supply chains, or even developing more stringent environmental labeling of products. And finally, in the context of climate change mitigation and adaptation, I think that the information about the linkages between global agricultural, animal, and food supply chains might also help to inform countries in identifying climate change mitigation actions to include in their NDCs, especially in relation to greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture and land use change and forestry. And in this sense, the methods that we have presented today can contribute to a better understanding of the drivers of these emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, which might reveal opportunities where countries could increase their ambition through reducing deforestation and forest degradation, or even improving the management of manure, livestock feed, etc.
Florence, what do you think about it? I mean, it is going to be really a change in the model that we work and we think with this type of tools, and we will promote coherency, do you think?
I think having an additional model really helps us get a better sense of the different, like the impact of the different assumptions we make in these models, like how much it matters. And I think that can help give a more diverse picture. I mean, especially as, I mean, for example, the EU and the UK and the US are considering these more importer country policies. This kind of data, I think, will be really useful. But I also think it's really important that these policies are not based on just one single data set, and but we actually get a diversity of models.
Martin, you mentioned Fabio, and you mentioned also the fact that so far we didn't have so disaggregated data on commodities. And you mentioned that you are curious about if this will make a difference or not. It will. Are you expecting that it will make a difference? It will help to understand better global versus regional and national?
Yeah, definitely. I think that there will be aspects of the global supply chains of food products where this detail will definitely help to or to reveal some interrelations, and that's actually extremely important for both mitigating impacts and mitigating risks. So I mean, we all see how fragile international supply chains are and how complex they are, and so we need to get a grasp of this complexity, and the more detail, the better, I would say. So we can manage those supply chains and reduce the risks, and also of course consumers and companies want to know their impacts they are creating in other places around the world. So I am convinced that this kind of physical MRIO databases are crucial for this task.
Thank you, Martin. Now we can open the floor for some questions. I see that there is 3 questions on the chat.
We may start with the question in the room if you would like so, Maria Jose, and then we go to the Q&A box. So Serena and Naoko requesting please your help to ask the question or to give the mic to the people in the room that have a question.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much. So my name is Satrio Wicaksono. I'm from EU RED Facility, European Forest Institute. So so I came a bit late actually, but so I apologize if this has been discussed. But I like to explore further what you discussed toward the end about like how this can be translated into policy making, you know, trade relations between countries. So one aspect related to this that maybe, I'm not sure if this has been discussed, is definitional issues. You know, I think you mentioned about like how the studies have been utilized by the consuming countries, but on the other hand, the producing countries have their own sort of like legal frameworks that might use different definitions. I mean, if we use the example of you know, definition of forest and deforestation that you put into the model, you know, different stakeholders, different countries might use definitions differently. And maybe I do not know much about WTO or ITC data. Even maybe I do not, in the context of like trade related stuff, the definitions might be different. Do you think that would be an issue? And then if so, you know, what's the way forward there, you know, in order for you know, the exchanges, you know, dialogues between producing and consuming countries can be, happening more smoothly. Thank you.
Maybe Iñaki, if you want to maybe to clarify a bit what the tool includes and doesn't include as regards this parts of the definition question, for instance.
Well, in terms of land use, I guess that you are referring mostly to the part that is related to land use. We have like two different types of land. Cropland on the one hand, that is basically the area reported by FAO statistics, that the area harvested for the production of the different agricultural products. And on the other hand, we compute the forest area harvested. And this basically is computed using some forest harvested index from the literature that basically translate the wood or the round wood harvested in one country. It translates into the forest area that has been actually harvested to extract that. It's not about the forest area, what we are reporting the satellite accounts. What we are reporting is the forest area that it has been in that year actually harvested in a specific country to harvest the round wood that has been used for the production of different wood products. Usually, for you to have an idea, it is in most countries below 1% of the forest area. So the area that you harvest in 1 year, more or less, is always below 1%. This is more or less what we are reporting. It depends on the country, of course, but this is what we are reporting in terms of forest area. Maybe you, Maria Jose, maybe you can elaborate a bit more.
Well, I think the definition it becomes a little bit less relevant because you are looking into the commodity, which is going to be transferred from one place to another and processed. So in essence, it could be less dependent than other things from the definition of forest in general, because you use the harvest data, and then you just interpret what is the land footprint of this harvest, which leads you to have, from my view, pretty independency from the definition itself.
And there is no data on deforestation itself within the tool at the moment. Maybe Florence, you can give an idea, or you can connect this type of information to the tool, like a multi-regional input-output table, but the table itself doesn't make the link between deforestation and trade. It provides some data that can be linked in the future to deforestation data, but at the moment this is not the case. Florence, I don't know if you want to elaborate a bit on that.
I think that's probably a different discussion. I would say, of course, the definition you use for deforestation matters, and it's one of the things we see, for example, in the EU legislation now, that's one of the hot points of discussion of what definition of forest and deforestation and especially degradation should be used. But I think that lies outside of the discussion today.
Thank you. Do we have more questions from the room? Okay, so we go for the Q&A.
We move to the chat.
Sorry, can we give the floor to the people that put question into the chat, or do we need to read the questions? Maria Teresa, can you confirm?
I am allowing the participants now to unmute.
Okay.
Maybe we can start with Benjamin Falwad. He's the first one.
Would be good. Benjamin, you have the floor if you want to put your question directly to our panelist.
Sure, thanks. My name is Ben. I'm from the LSE's Forest Lab. I've done some work with World Input Output databases like the WIOD and Diora. I was just wondering about the allocation of products to downstream uses throughout supply chains in this new tool. Specifically, do you have country-specific data to allocate sub-products, or are you having to use regional or global averages? and other places in the tool, if you can tell us a bit more about the degree to which you're forced to rely on larger spatial aggregates. Thank you.
Yes, we use country-specific shares. For some commodities, they are common to all the countries, but for other not. You can imagine that supply chains, like the case of animal products, or imagine milk, the milk supply chains, depending on the country, you can have different shares of products like butter, cream, cheese, skimmed milk, etc. And this change across countries. So the answer is yes, we use shares that are country specific mostly.
Dominique, do you want to add something to that, or?
No, that's very true. In fact, that's what I want to compliment, that in the food balance sheet compilation purposes, we have quite good information about the country-specific shares and extraction rates as much as possible, and we use them like that. So there are a few cases whereby sometimes those information could be not available at the country level, and then we have to rely on regional or global averages, actually. So, but yes, the country-specific information are mostly used whenever they're available.
Thank you, Dominique and Iñaki. And maybe we can invite Perrine Laroche to take the floor and put 2 questions. Maybe one we respond, and the second one, if you would like. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm Perrine Laroche. I am a PhD student now at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, and I'm now working with mostly physical accounts of trade flows. And basically, I'm interested into the inclusion of processed products into these trade models, because I'm trying to understand to which extent the consumption of sort of what I would call the final consumption, meaning really what people eat or what do we do with these agricultural commodities, how much this is driving the impacts. And I would like to ask to which extent so this new database is taking this highly processed product that I would call consumer goods into account. And then how does that play when you when we talk about, like, for example, the example of Belgium consuming cocoa? Is it actually the industry in Belgium consuming cocoa, or is it the Belgian people consuming cocoa? So what is the impact on the discourse that we can have about consumption? Thank you.
Thank you. So
Thank you very much.
Back to you, Iñaki.
Yeah, well, I think that you have pointed one of the limitations of the database, basically the limitation that we cannot track highly processed products. For instance, this is something that it's pretty clear when we analyze forest supply chains. We cannot track, for instance, the embodied wood in furniture, because furniture is a composite of many different things, and we cannot track that. Also, in the case of food, what the supply transition account report in terms of food is not the actual food consumption, it's the apparent consumption of food. So we have to take that into account when we interpret the results. And I would recommend that this database can be used to approximate the land footprint of nations to some extent quite a high detail. But in case that you wanted, or the user wanted to get deeper into specific products, I would recommend other approaches different than multi-regional, both physical or monetary input-output databases. And I would recommend to use like life cycle assessment or this type of analysis that can go deeper into detail.
Thanks.
If I may add on a few words, basically. So the food variable that you saw in the tool, also from this the food balance sheet framework, we always advise users that they should consider food as food available for human consumption, not necessarily the food consumption, basically. Because if you look at the food balance sheet framework point of view, so we are looking at the production and trade minus, of course, the exports, and then see what is available. Now, if someone have done a household survey, for example, that will give a better picture of the food consumption. That's why it's always advisable to really add the word food availability for human consumption, not necessarily the food consumption. That's very important.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dominic. And maybe we can take the second question from Perrine. Or sorry, Naki.
Just to add something that I mean, you have to interpret correctly the information that you have in the supply decision accounts. For instance, when you eat chocolate, you are not only using, when you eat as a consumer chocolate, you are not only consuming cocoa, you are also consuming milk, and you are also consuming sugar and many other products. And this is reflected in the supply decision account, but in many different products. So the part of the milk of the chocolate is reported in milk, and the part of sugar is reported in sugar. So this, I mean, this has to be taken into account when analyzing or when trying to do very granular analysis.
Thank you. And Perrine, you had a second question, if I'm correct.
I think Martin wants to clarify something.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add a few words. So in my analysis, I have found that this that for food products, the supply chains are actually not that complex. I mean, there are of course highly processed food products, but most food and feed is traded in a raw or just less processed way. So there in the area of food, this new tool and also Fabio are not losing so much highly processed products. Of course, it is an issue, but it's probably at the aggregate level of national consumption, it's not that important. Although for non-food products, it's really crucial to include these flows from other data sources, because FAO does not have information on non-food uses of agricultural commodities and further steps of processing, and therefore these non-food supply chains, also this part of agricultural supply chains is the one that is growing most for industrialized countries, while the food supply chains are mostly not growing. Non-food uses are growing, and the import shares, or the share of traded commodities for non-food uses, is on average 2/3 for at least for European countries. 2/3 are imported from outside of Europe for non-food uses, but for food uses only 15% are imported from outside Europe. So when we want to know this distant impacts of our consumption, we particularly need to know also about non-food uses of agricultural commodities. And that's where we link the Fabio, the physical MRAO, with a monetary MRAO to complete the supply chains also for these type of highly processed non-food products.
Thank you, Martin. Very useful compliment you gave. And Perrine, do you want to put your second question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the first answers to this question. And my second point is about the conversion factors, because so you have this list of child products that are related to parent products, and then you need to, so you have the flows are recorded in so I guess in mass, and then how do you convert basically the mass of child product into equivalent of parent products?
Yeah, basically there are different ways of doing that. In the physical multi-regional input-output table that we have that we are developing, this is done in using according to the mass of the child. For instance, you are using wheat for producing flour wheat and bran of wheat. we have information from the supply utilization accounts, from the share file of the part of wheat that it enters in the production of flour and bran of flour. Flour and bran of wheat. Okay, so this is part of the information. This share of the wheat, because wheat can be used for many different purposes. So we have that share, and on the other hand, we have to distribute the part of the wheat that enters in this branch in the production of flour and bran. We have to allocate to the two products, and we do it in according to the mass of the different products. If 1 kilo of 1 ton of wheat, you are getting 800 kilograms of bran of flour wheat and 200 kilograms of bran, 80% is going to be to allocate to wheat and 20% to bran. But it depends. This is the standard table that we are producing. But for for different analyses, what you can do is to weight the different products according to to different criteria. For instance, you can weight them according to the caloric content. This is something that we are doing. In the case of when we do the analysis related to food security, we weight the different child according to the caloric content, or you can even use prices in order to weight the different products. So I mean, by default, the table is in physical units, and it's all in tons. And the split between different between the parent product and the child is done in mass terms, but it can be done or transformed into caloric or even in monetary terms.
Okay.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, it's a question also for us when choosing how to use the table and how to design the table, because for instance we know for some commodities and the example of cocoa, we assume that cocoa is not cultivated for producing husk, but only for producing the valuable part of cocoa. So when we are going to attribute some cause of deforestation maybe to cocoa, it's a bit strange to consider that husk part of cocoa is producing deforestation or is driving deforestation. So we have this type of question when using the tool, and I think we will work further with researchers to see how to make best use of the data. Maria Jose, you wanted to add something. Please talk very close to the mic because your sound is really poor.
Good point, because Martin said something which I think is really interesting. There is an increasing demand of some of the by-side products of the food products that are used within the circular economy, which is growing quite a lot. So my question is, how you separate that some of what was considered waste is now going to get into new products that are into this new circular economy, from the possible growing demand of products per se for other uses than food.
Thank you, Maria Jose. Serena, can you confirm if we have other questions from the room, because we can see your hand is raised? We can't hear you really, but I don't see. Maybe if someone wants to put a question, they can just stand up.
I'm getting the answers right now, and then I don't know, Maria Jose and Iñaki, I might bombard you inbox with so many questions you would block me later. So I have your paper here, so I will be asking questions later. So I mean, I'm digesting the whole thing.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Digesting, so I think it's Benjamin the heads up. It is still a new hand rather than an old hand.
Okay, and we have another question from Benjamin, so maybe we can take it if we have time, and then we will go to you for the concluding remarks, Serena. Benjamin, please.
Thanks for the chance to ask a second one. This one is maybe just a bit more general. As a user of these data, I really appreciate the work that is done to produce this sort of database. And I sometimes think about the risks inherent in it. And from a policy perspective, I think it's possible for people to misapply these data because you have to use aggregates. And this is the data that's available. A company may look at this and say, okay, you know, I've checked this database and it says there's no deforestation in this country, or the regional average obscures what's happening in the situation in their concession, this kind of issue. And I wonder if you worry when thinking about the policy impact of your work about the risks of aggregation, about misrepresentation due to the need to use aggregate data, and if this is something that we can guard against or not.
Providing information on deforestation, but FAO does publish information on deforestation through the forest resource assessment, and especially recently the remote sensing survey we did within the forest resource assessment. So as you said, we could think it would be bad used. We can also have concern about the definition of forest, because we are using a specific definition at FL level, which is maybe not the same as some other stakeholders would like to use definition at international level. So there are all questions, but we do think that providing good data and data that we can really trace, I mean, because we are able to explain how we get those data and what are the limitations they embed. We think it's always useful for designing policy, and be it public policies or corporate policies. As for the table, I believe that our panelists can say more than I do, but I feel it's a bit complex for a company to make direct use of multi-regional input-output table. You do need some experts like Florence, Martin, Maria Jose, and Iñaki, and our colleagues from the statistics division like Dominic, to be able to use this type of tool. So it's more something that we see as an input for further research. But I would like to hear our panelists on that. Thank you. Would like to start. Martin.
If I may, yeah. So I definitely think that there is a risk of misusing these data, but it's not only a risk of too much aggregation, there's also a risk of too much detail, actually. So when you think of a country where in some places deforestation is happening, in others not, but then a company that is importing from a place where no deforestation is happening is feeling safe, but actually it might drive other producers going deeper into the forests and thereby indirectly drive deforestation. So I'm not speaking against detail. We are currently working on a highly detailed version, including 5,000 municipalities for Brazil. So we are splitting this country into single municipalities, because of course Brazil is also very important in terms of deforestation risk, commodities, and but also these very detailed assessments need to be interpreted and used carefully.
Yes, I think Martin summarized that nicely. I think I would just add on to that, like, there's not only the aggregation problem, but there's also the assumptions we make along the way, which is connected to the scale thing as well. So.
Yeah, that's for sure. Thank you. So I hope we responded all the questions we had, and I would really thank our dear panelists and give the floor to Serena to give us the concluding remarks of the side event.
Yeah, and I will remove my mask because I'm far away from everybody, so that should be safe. Can you hear me also from a connected world? Yeah, super. Thank you very much. First of all, really, I want to thank especially the participants who who are here, the panelists who are, all the panelists that are connected, and also all the participants who connected virtually to this experiment. Let's say we wanted to have a technical workshop. Fortunately, when we have some issues with the travels, but not nonetheless, we wanted to maintain the conversation today, taking the opportunity at the World Forestry Congress really to start disseminating the work that we are doing in collaboration with BC3, and also all the important feedback that we received, and the kind of the technical discussion that we received from the different panelists. So yeah, to conclude this session, I will not be able to really sum up the kind of technical details that has been done by our experts. That's not the ambition. I just would like though to kind of really mention that sharing this information for us, it's very dear to our heart, to our interest, because the tool, as Caroline mentioned, is not finalized yet. The statistical result is still ongoing. It's a really kind of a dynamic process, the one that we are maintaining, and we really benefit from the feedback that we could receive online, via email, in the conversation that could be also happen in the future, and also from the potential interest that this conversation stimulated for collaboration, again here among the participants, but also online. Also for us, it's important because really, as you could hear also from the colleague from FAO Statistics Division, there is a massive work that is done with FAO member countries in really gathering consistent, reliable, and updated information on the agriculture production and trade. Really, when we put and when we use that material also in the generation of new data, new knowledge, that really makes an eminent sense. But as also Martin was really mentioning, we need to see how to use that information carefully, so not to really create potential confusion of misleading information. So for all of that, the collaboration from the research community is essential, and also the discussion that we have constantly with our member countries, with the government, and with the stakeholders on the ground. Of course, in this context, there is always a context of increasing awareness of agricultural markets and developing regulatory framework. The information that we can generate is always, and how it is embodied in trade is critical, really. So that's why also studies like the one published by Florence, for example, really thank you very much, Florence, for being here with us today, have been referenced so often also in the design of the EU legal proposal concerning certain relevant commodities and products associated with deforestation and forest degradation. Therefore, there is really a need for decision-making to base the regulatory framework and the decisions on science. And this is why this is really call for connection between science and policy, and we want really to continue doing that. Iñaki really put at the very beginning a sort of list of possible uses of the multi-regional input-output table. Of course, there could be also other uses that could be done. We hope that this can be a starting point for exchanges. So please, even if you've been a bit shy here, don't be shy. Contact us. You're going to have all the contact of also the panelists and my colleague also in the website, and you can ask me and I can pass to you. But really, it's important to make those connections. Also for us that we work on the REDD+ domain, supporting countries in reducing the emission from deforestation and forest degradation, moving steps into really how to integrate the work on agriculture, how to enhance the productivity, for example, without really encroaching into forest land. This sort of work is essential when we look into that domain as well. And your feedback is going to be very critical. So last but not least, I would like to thank UN REDD program has been kind of facilitating, or actually financing the study that we are doing with BC3 and also the French Ministry of Agriculture. And especially would like to thank, behind this, there is kind of a small group of people, very dynamic, who's been managing to have this really web stream webinar happening live with the combination presential and live. So with that, I thank you very much. And for all of us here in Seoul, if you please have a very nice rest of the evening. It's kind of late, 7:30, time for relax and get ready for tomorrow morning to start again with a lot of new events. And for all of you in Europe or across the world, enjoy the rest of the day or the night if you're connecting from even farther away. Thank you very much. Until the next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye
Bye.
to all. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Nice night.
Bye. Bye, colleagues. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot. Goodbye.